foundational history.
It's really more than just moving historical dates around. It's a complete redefinition of spiritual purpose.
Yeah.
We're not talking about, minor tweaks to theology.
Oh, no.
We are asking this fundamental, really provocative question that sits at the heart of the whole mystery. What if the entire goal of spiritual mastery, the whole point of the Christos consciousness, isn't about preparing for death, not about getting into heaven, but the actual transcendence of death in this life?
And that is the core claim. It runs like this electric current through all of our sources today. The material argues pretty relentlessly that what we call core Christianity, it devolved into something they provocatively label a death cult.
A death cult. And that this institution didn't just suppress the actual methods Yeshua taught,
Right.
methods for, say, cellular regeneration, matter manipulation, even indefinite life, but that it actively went out and destroyed the architectural blueprints for what you could call human invincibility.
So our mission today it's ambitious. We're calling it an alchemical reformation. We're going to unpack that historical suppression. We're going to try and reveal the hidden practices that actually survived. And this is the exciting part, show how modern science, things like quantum biology and longevity research, is now starting to confirm what those first communities apparently already knew.
We're looking for the operating manual, the technical specs, not the poetry.
Okay, let's get into it. And we have to start with what is, I think, the most shocking entry point into this whole thesis. It's designed to just completely disrupt your comfort zone right away. I'm talking about that horrifying, really obscure Talmudic image from Gittin 57a, the one where Jesus is being boiled in excrement in Gehenna. Why would the sources lead with something so aggressively antagonistic?
Because that image, which, it was born from centuries of really intense religious conflict, it functions on two different levels.
Yeah.
On the surface, of course, it's a polemic. It's just an expression of hatred, of eternal punishment.
Right.
But if you're trained to read it esoterically, which is what the source material is urging you to do, it reveals the alchemical solve, the precise methodology for transformation.
That's a huge cognitive shift. How does a scene of, eternal punishment suddenly become a technical diagram for liberation?
The source explains that the perpetual lake, or the boiling cesspool, it's not a geographical place. It's not a judgment from some external god. It's ontological. Yes. It represents the loop of suffering that gets created when our consciousness identifies completely, 100%, with the mortal entropic frame. It's that state of perpetual fear and scarcity and suffering that comes from believing mortality is absolute.
So the boiling isn't God's wrath. The boiling is the agony we inflict on ourselves by resisting.
Exactly. When that Christos principle, the awakened, the immortal part of consciousness, gets trapped, or seems to get trapped, in the very systems that are supposed to liberate it, well, the body is seen as just matter. It's subject to decay. It has to dissolve. The boiling lake is that necessary dissolution. It's the purification.
In alchemy, that sounds like the Negredo stage.
It is the Negredo. For anyone not familiar, that's the blackening, the putrefaction.
Yeah.
It's the stage where everything has to break down into its most basic primal elements before it can be rebuilt.
And psychologically, the Negredo it's brutal. It's confronting your shadow, your trauma, all that deep existential pain.
Yes, and so the eternal punishment isn't the verdict. It's the perpetual agony of the ego, refusing to let go, refusing to die. It experiences that process of refinement, the alchemical fire, as hell.
So the self-aware consciousness has to go through the fire, but if it clings to the illusion of its mortal self, it experiences that meltdown as just endless torment.
That's it. And this reframes everything. It also connects directly to another controversial but weirdly comforting insight from the sources, the Quranic reframing.
You're talking about Surah 4.157.
Yes, where it denies the literal crucifixion. It states, they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it was made to appear so to them.
And the source highlights this, why? As preserving the esoteric truth.
Exactly. Because historically, the crucifixion was the most powerful tool for suppressing this alchemical knowledge. If the Christos, the fully realized immortal consciousness, could be beaten by temporal powers, by violence and material death, then the whole system is broken.
But if the true essence, the fully realized self, cannot be killed,
then the one on the cross was a shadow, a projection, a temporal form. The conscious being cannot ultimately be destroyed by unconscious systems, no matter how violent or total they are. And that's the profound comfort the source talks about. Spiritual invincibility isn't physical immunity. It's the deep awareness that your essence completely transcends the drama.
And that leads us straight to the core theological reversal we have to cover, the greatest heresy. If the Christos can't be defeated by death, and if we are supposed to follow the Christos, then the core assumption of mainstream religion that we must die has to be flawed.
It's a whole ballgame. That's the hinge that the entire suppression turns on, the supreme enslaving doctrine.
Mm.
It's not in any specific dogma or any particular sin. It's the unquestioned metaphysical assumption that entropy is absolute and death is inevitable.
The source calls that the true original sin.
It is the acceptance of mortality.
Let's just spend a second on the implications of that acceptance, because it's massive.
Okay, so when a civilization accepts entropy and death as necessary, it immediately generates a whole matrix of control mechanisms.
Mm.
First, you get scarcity.
Right.
If life is short and resources are finite, then competition is mandatory. That justifies all sorts of economic control. Second, you get dependency. If your transformation is always deferred to an external agent, a priest, a messiah, a reward after you die, then you maintain institutional power.
And third, fear.
Third is fear. The fear of death is the ultimate political lever. It's easily monetized, easily weaponized to enforce obedience.
So any institution that promises you a reward after the grave or a resurrection at the end of time, they're just deferring the alchemical truth to maintain control in the present. They're weaponizing that metaphysical error.
Precisely. The masters of Gnosis Yeshua, the Buddha, the Hermeticists, they all taught that the kingdom is here, the transformation is now. The power to overcome these physical limits is inherent to consciousness itself.
And the sources are really clear on this. When Yeshua said, "You will do greater works than these," in John 14:12, he wasn't being poetic.
No, he was stating a technical specification. The works he showed, the healing, the matter manipulation, the resurrection, they weren't unique miracles. They were repeatable outcomes of an applied consciousness technology.
So groups like the Arians and the Gnostics, they saw the Christos as the prototype, the first successful model, not a one-off divine intervention.
Exactly. And that context changes the mission entirely. It moves from worship to emulation.
Okay, so that foundational misunderstanding sets the stage for the systematic destruction of the method. This gets us into section 1, the historical suppression. Why did this method just disappear?
Well, we've established the why. The alchemical gospel, this teaching of indefinite life and cellular regeneration, it had to be suppressed. A population that's free from the fear of death, that's capable of self-healing and material manifestation, that population is fundamentally ungovernable.
Right. How do you collect taxes from them? How do you enforce military service or maintain a social hierarchy when people understand their own atomic authority?
You can't. Institutions need dependency, scarcity, and fear to survive. The alchemical gospel delivers the opposite: independence, abundance, and invincibility. It was an existential threat.
And this transition from a liberation technology to a control mechanism, it happened in stages.
It did, very deliberate political stages, and the first critical stage is what the source calls Paul's literalization.
Paul is such a complex figure here, a true mystic, a genius no doubt, but also the person who, maybe without meaning to, started this whole process of externalizing salvation.
He did. He shifted the central focus. It moved from following Christ's method of transcending death to faith in Christ's death and resurrection as a singular past event.
And that created a spectator religion.
It did. The hard, rigorous alchemical work of purifying your own body and mind was replaced by a legal transaction.
Belief. So it's like learning engineering versus just worshiping the engineer who built the bridge. You focus on the symbol of the achievement, not the actual methodology that got you there.
And that was the crucial first step. It prepared the ground for centralized institutional power. If salvation is internal, personalized, and based on repeatable practice, all you need is a teacher, not a church.
But if it's based on an external belief in a unique, unrepeatable event,
then you need an institution to mediate that belief, to administer sacraments, and to maintain the official story.
And that need for mediation sets up stage 2, the imperial compromise, specifically the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE.
Nicaea is the perfect case study. It's politics dressed up as theology. When Constantine decided to make Christianity the state religion, it had to be, structurally compatible with the Roman Empire. It needed control. It needed hierarchy.
And the central fight there was the Arian controversy.
It was.
Now, this is a bit of a deep cut for some, so let's slow down and explain what was actually at stake, because on the surface, it just sounds like a semantic debate over a couple of Greek letters.
But it was everything. It was a fight over whether Christ was homoousios, of the same substance as God, or homoousios, of a similar substance. The difference of that one letter, the iota, was the difference between empire and anarchy.
How so?
Well, if Christ is homoousios, if he's wholly divine, uncreated, unique, of the exact same substance as the Father, then his powers, his transcendence of death, they are non-transferable.
He's a one-off, a celestial anomaly.
Exactly. And his status means you have to worship him from a distance, which reinforces the institutional dependency that Paul established.
But if he's homoousios, if he's the perfected human, the first of many who showed the way by attaining a similar divine state through practice and gnosis,
Then every single human has the same potential. His transcendence is replicable. And that view, the Arian view, was an existential threat to the whole imperial project. Constantine needed a god who could only be reached through the church, a church that was now aligned with his empire.
so the council chose the empire-compatible theology. They made sure the population would stay reliant on the institution and deferred all that potential to the afterlife.
Which made the Christos gnosis a political liability. And that leads directly to stage 3, the Gnostic purge.
Oh.
This is when they started burning the manuals.
Right. Once the theological decision was made, any text that contradicted the new imperial framework, they had to go.
Yes. And these were the texts that had the actual methods, the detailed stages of transformation, the consciousness practices for cellular regeneration,
Yeah.
the complex cosmology of internal transformation. They had to be destroyed.
What specifically were they getting rid of? What did these Gnostic texts actually contain that was so dangerous?
2 things, really, that the institution couldn't tolerate. First was personal authority. Texts like the Gospel of Thomas are just sayings. The focus is on direct understanding. He who finds the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. No priests, no ritual, no mediation needed.
And the second thing,
Technical depth. Texts like Pistis Sophia, they describe these elaborate multi-stage initiations, specific visualizations, esoteric knowledge of the body's energy centers. It's a true alchemical manual. It details the movement of light and energy within the physical body to achieve spiritual ascent and, importantly, corporeal perfection.
so these weren't just alternative stories. They were rival training manuals. They taught people how to bypass the church's mediation entirely, how to be spiritually and biologically autonomous.
Precisely. And so the institutional forces made sure that what survived, the texts that became the canon, were the ones emphasizing sin, judgment, external priestly authority, and a salvation that happens somewhere else after you die.
Effectively cementing the fear of death as the central organizing principle of Western civilization.
And that framework was then, crystallized by people like Thomas Aquinas in the medieval period. He created this whole philosophical system that framed the physical body as inherently fallen, a prison of flesh that only death could let you escape from.
Which makes death and entropy theological necessities.
Right. The alchemical tradition didn't die, of course. It just went underground. It encoded itself in Hermeticism and Kabbalah, and later in Sufism and esoteric groups like the Rosicrucians. But to speak openly about cellular mastery or manifestation, that wasn't just heresy. It was a risk to your life.
So what about the Protestant Reformation? You identified this as a missed opportunity. If Luther broke away from that corrupt central authority, why didn't he restore the alchemical gospel?
Well, Luther was right to attack the corruption, the sale of indulgences, the priesthood. Those were symptoms of the underlying institutional rot. But he preserved, and in some ways, he actually reinforced the fundamental death cult theology.
How did he reinforce it?
By emphasizing total depravity, the idea that humans are inherently worthless, morally bankrupt, completely incapable of good works on their own. He deepened the sense of human powerlessness.
And by stressing salvation by faith alone, sola fide, he just doubled down on the externalization of power.
Exactly. He kept the spectator religion model. He just replaced the Catholic priest as the mediator with the written word and personal belief. But the fundamental structure dependency, deference of power, that all remained.
So he attacked the operational failure of the church, but he left the core metaphysical error completely untouched.
And the source argues that this is the pattern. Every major split, Catholic Orthodox, Catholic Protestant, it's just a replication of the same control mechanisms.
That's the structural evil the source identifies. It's not just that individuals are corrupt, it's the structure itself, which requires dependency, requires deferral of transformation, requires an emphasis on human limitation. The hidden evil is teaching people to accept powerlessness as a spiritual truth.
It is.
Which means we have to look back at the very beginning. If the imperial church burned the manuals, then the next question is, who held the key to the original blueprint? And why was their authority so successfully erased from the timeline? This takes us to Section 2, the Forgotten Hierarchy.
This is one of Christianity's most profound and successfully obscured historical facts. The source material is absolutely adamant about this. James the Just, Yeshua's own brother, was the undisputed leader of the Jerusalem community, the original practice-based headquarters, not Peter.
It seems impossible that something so huge could be obscured, but the evidence is there. It's hidden in plain sight, even after centuries of later editing designed to emphasize Peter and Roman authority.
Let's just pull those scriptural traces out. Once you look past the standard narrative, the authority of James it's everywhere.
The smoking gun has to be the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15.
Absolutely. The first major crisis of the early church.
Yeah.
Should Gentiles have to follow Torah law? It erupts. Peter speaks, Paul and Barnabas give their testimony. But the whole thing only concludes when James stands up.
And he doesn't offer a suggestion.
No. He makes a decisive judicial ruling. He says, therefore my judgment is. That final word, the one that determines church policy, it belongs to him, the recognized head.
And then there's Acts 21.18. Paul's last trip back to Jerusalem says Paul goes into James, and all the elders were there. Peter isn't even mentioned in that scene. The central authority Paul is reporting to is clearly James.
Yeah, Paul himself names the structure. In Galatians 2.9, he lists the pillars: James, Cephas, Peter, and John. James is first. In ancient texts, that almost always means precedence, administrative superiority.
But the most telling detail, the one that really shows the disciplinary power James had, comes right after that. In Galatians 2.1112, Peter is in Antioch, eating with Gentiles, breaking the dietary customs. But when men arrive from James, Peter instantly withdraws. He separates himself.
This is critical. Peter, the supposed rock, the supreme apostle, he's subordinate. He's intimidated by those who belong to James. It implies a doctrinal or disciplinary faction that held the real authority. Peter was the senior apostle among the 12, sure, but James was the spiritual anchor and the administrative leader.
This completely changes the picture of the early church. It suggests the original community had this stable, locally rooted, family-led leadership, not the scattered, charismatic, and doctrinally flexible model that Paul was building.
And the extra-biblical confirmation is just overwhelming. Josephus describes James's execution in 62 CE. He confirms his identity as the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, and he notes his death caused a huge public outrage among righteous Jews. He was a figure of immense moral authority far beyond just the Christian sect.
And then the Gnostic texts themselves. The Gospel of Thomas, Logian 12, gives James cosmological significance. Yeshua tells the disciples that after he leaves, they should go to James, for whose sake heaven and earth came into being.
That implies James wasn't just an administrator. He was the spiritual and physical anchor for the continuation of the teachings. He was the holder of the esoteric lineage, the Mashiach lineage, the one who carries the technical specifications forward.
So let's look at the community that James led. How did they actually manifest this alchemical, practice-based faith?
It was all rooted in demonstrable collective transformation. First, you have radical economic sharing. Acts 2.44 says they had everything in common. The source argues this wasn't just, simple charity. It was a consciousness-directed material manifestation practice.
Okay, explain that connection. How is sharing property a manifestation technique?
By dissolving the attachment to private property, that core egoic belief in scarcity and mine, they created a unified field of shared resources and collective intent. They were operating outside the entropic paradigm. They were testing the principle that focused collective coherence can influence the quantum field to create abundance.
Effectively eliminating scarcity and poverty within their own ranks through conscious creation. They were generating the resources internally.
Right. Second, routine healing. The book of Acts is filled with the apostles performing signs and wonders. People were seeking Peter's shadow just to be healed. Healing wasn't an occasional miracle. It was standard procedure. It was the expected outcome of applying the consciousness technologies Yeshua taught.
And third, direct gnosis. The Pentecost event where the Holy Spirit descends and they all speak in different languages, and then the meeting place shaking in Acts 4. These show that altered states, direct mystical experience, the instantaneous download of information, this was the expected norm for the community.
It was a repeatable technology of consciousness, not a one-time historical event. The whole point of the Jerusalem community was to prove the system was replicable. And this is why the rupture between Paul and James was so profound and ultimately so disastrous for the Gnosis.
Detail that rupture for us. What was the core divide theologically and practically between Paul's model and James's model?
Well, James taught transformation through rigorous practice, through ethical discipline, like Torah observance and dietary laws. It was a body-mind-spirit integration that required total commitment to self-mastery.
Whereas Paul taught transformation through faith and an external sacrifice.
Belief over practice. And Paul cemented this by declaring his independence. He claimed his authority came from a private mystical revelation on the Damascus Road, completely bypassing the established family-led authority in Jerusalem. He created a Gentile movement that didn't require the intense, physical, disciplined practice that the Jamaican community demanded.
And the outcome was inevitable, really.
It was. Once James was executed in 62 CE and Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE, James's practice-based community groups like the Ebionites and Nazarenes, they were scattered. They were marginalized as Judaizing heresy.
And Paul's Gentile, belief-based, institution-friendly Christianity, detached from Jerusalem and all that rigorous practice, it became the only game in town.
The technology was effectively replaced by the theology. The technical specification was buried under a mountain of mythology.
Okay, that clarifies the historical mechanism of suppression. So let's pivot now to the exciting part. Section 3. The alchemical technologies of the Christos. We need to move beyond just history and define those technical specifications that were lost.
Right. When Yeshua says, "I am the resurrection and the life," in John 11:25, he's not promising some future event. He is making a statement of present tense mastery over biological processes. This is the definition of cellular sovereignty and regeneration.
So the miracles stop being acts of divine intervention and they become repeatable demonstrations of an applied science.
Exactly. I mean, look at the demonstrations. Healing leprosy, paralysis, blindness. The source points out that these are all physical manifestations of profound cellular miscommunication, or bioelectric dissonance, an overriding coherent consciousness signal, one that's free from entropic programming, can instantly correct that miscommunication.
It's like rebooting a crashed computer, restoring the original factory settings for perfect function.
And raising the dead Lazarus versus his daughter. That demonstrates that there's a reversible window in biological death. Consciousness, if it's maintained in a coherent state, has the capacity to reconstitute the body before total entropic decay sets in. His own resurrection, after 3 days, that was the ultimate proof of concept.
Next, matter manipulation and manifestation. Multiplying loaves and fishes, turning water into wine. The source is insistent. We have to translate this directly into quantum principles.
Absolutely. The fundamental quantum principle is that matter is just condensed energy. And energy is structured information. That information is malleable, and it responds directly to focused consciousness.
So an adept who fully understands that non-local connection between their internal state and the quantum field
can influence probability collapses to manifest specific material outcomes.
This must be the key to that quote about the mustard seed. If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. It's not about the volume of faith, is it? It's about the density.
It's density and purity of focus. The smaller the seed, the more dense and singular the focus. Doubt, a scattered mind that just introduces uncertainty, which leads to a collapse into the most likely, most entropic outcome. Singular, coherent intention forces the collapse into the desired outcome.
It's a practical instruction on the consciousness-reality interface.
It is. The Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as within, so without. It's a perfect description of the mechanism. The microcosm of your focused mind shapes the macrocosm of material reality through absolute resonance.
And the culmination of all these practices is experiencing the kingdom as present reality.
The kingdom of God is not a place you go when you die. Luke 17:21. The kingdom of God is within you. Mark 1:15. The kingdom is at hand. It's an available mode of perception, of operation right now.
And its characteristics are freedom from entropy, the capacity for self-directed cellular regeneration, the ability to manifest what you need, and the total transcendence of the fear of death.
Which is exactly what the early Jerusalem community demonstrated through their collective coherence.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me, connecting these ancient claims to modern science, the quantum mystical synthesis.
The cross-disciplinary evidence is just stacking up. It's making the ancient claims look less like mythology and more like pre-scientific observations. You start with quantum biology. Researchers like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, they theorize that consciousness doesn't arise from bulk brain activity, but from quantum processes happening inside cellular microtubules.
And if consciousness operates at that foundational quantum level, the deep information layer of the cell, then it absolutely can influence the cascade of molecular processes that determine our health and our longevity.
Which connects directly to bioelectricity. Michael Levin's work is groundbreaking. It shows that large-scale bioelectric patterns govern everything: cellular organization, limb regeneration, even which way a flatworm regrows its head. These patterns are the morphogenetic fields. They're the blueprint for the body.
Okay, let's just define morphogenetic fields simply for everyone.
Think of it as the invisible energy blueprint that tells cells where they are and what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
If you cut a flatworm in half, the cells immediately consult this field to reconstruct the missing half perfectly. Levin showed you can manipulate the bioelectric charge and tell a cell to grow an eye where a liver should be.
That is profound. So, if the field is the blueprint and Yeshua's consciousness operated in a state of cellular sovereignty, then focused intention or deep meditation could influence these bioelectric fields. It could direct regeneration and age reversal.
Which takes us to epigenetics. We know gene expression is plastic, it's not fixed. We have the technology now with Yamanaka factors to chemically reprogram adult cells back into pluripotent stem cells. We can functionally reverse cellular age in a lab.
So the source is proposing that consciousness-directed cellular reprogramming isn't scientifically impossible. The mechanism is already proven. We just lack the unified framework because our materialist paradigm is self-limiting.
And the most accessible, undeniable proof that consciousness operates through these quantum biological mechanisms? The placebo effect.
Right. It's not just in your head.
Not at all. Belief triggers measurable physiological changes. Powerful immune responses, neurochemical alterations, pain reduction, in some cases even tumor regression. And the nocebo effect proves the opposite. Negative belief can literally generate illness.
This demonstrates consciousness exercising its latent biological authority through these very precise pathways. The real magic is the technology of belief operating directly on the morphogenetic fields of the body.
And if you accept the limit of entropy, the body manifests that limit. If you assert cellular sovereignty, the body has to follow. This is why the practices were so threatening. They empowered the individual with biological autonomy.
Okay, so if the technology was suppressed, where did it go? It couldn't have just vanished. This brings us to Section 4, the occultic continuity, where the gnosis survived.
The transfiguration thesis. The idea that the gnosis never died, it just transformed. It encoded itself into new cultural and religious forms whenever suppression became too violent.
We've already established that the Jamesian community, the Ebionites, they fled to Pella after 70 CE, carrying the gnosis with them. This lineage becomes critical for Islamic preservation.
The source makes a really powerful case here for the deep theological parallels between Ebionite Christianity and early Islam. And these parallels are direct links back to the practice-based faith of Jerusalem.
Such as?
Well, Jesus is accepted as a great human prophet, not a unique divine being. There's a denial of the literal crucifixion. There's no concept of inherited original sin. And there's mandatory emphasis on ritual purity and specific legal practices, like wudu and halal.
A practice-based faith requires rigor and ritual purity. A belief-based faith is much more permissive.
Exactly. Islam preserves that Jamesian structure of discipline and works far more faithfully than Pauline Christianity did. And this lineage finds its most explicit, detailed continuation in Sufi Islam.
The Sufi orders acted as libraries for this consciousness technology.
They absolutely did. Sufism systematically preserved the Gnostic practices. Things like dhikr, which is repetitive invocation or mantra, identical to Gnostic invocation. Muraqaba, which is sustained meditation and self-observation. And khalwa, seclusion retreats. These are all functional technologies for achieving altered states and mastering the consciousness-body interface.
And the Sufis mapped the progression through these consciousness stages, the stations and states, with the same alchemical precision the Gnostics used.
Right, and this hidden continuous knowledge is personified in the archetype of Khidr the Green One, who is Moses' mysterious teacher in Surah 18.
Khidr is the key figure representing this direct gnosis, the knowledge that exists outside conventional law.
He is. He's associated with immortality. He drank from the fountain of life. He represents the living archetype of the immortal adept who preserves and passes on the actual technologies across all religious forms, completely bypassing the institutional priesthoods. He's the master who comes to the initiate directly. He ensures the continuity of the technical knowledge, even when the books are burned.
He is the non-local teacher, the ever-present guide, whether he's called Elijah or St. George or the verdant teacher. He validates that the technology is always available to those who seek the practice, regardless of their nominal religion.
Exactly.
But the source material doesn't shy away from the shadow side of all this suppressed power. I want to address a really challenging insight you, the listener, brought up. The idea of groups like Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram being possible, darker mutations of this suppressed, unintegrated energy.
It's a profoundly difficult point, but a necessary one. The darker mutation is the explosion of unintegrated collective trauma. The pattern just repeats throughout history. Authentic teaching leads to institutional capture, which is then followed by violent suppression of the practitioners, and that creates this deep, collective transgenerational trauma.
And then the shadow inversion erupts. The denied violence and rage from that suppression just expresses itself as a grotesque parody of the original teaching.
Take the word jihad. The original meaning is the inner struggle, that rigorous alchemical purification against the lower nature, against the ego. When the institutions are captured, this inner transformative struggle gets corrupted. It gets projected externally. It turns into offensive violence against a perceived external enemy. The inner war becomes the outer war.
And the concept of martyrdom, the Sufi teaching of die before you die, the ego death, the transformation in the fire that gets twisted into literal death-seeking and suicide bombing.
It's the ultimate expression of the death cult replacing the life transformation. The technology for transcending death, when it's suppressed and met with violence, it creates this immense spiritual pressure. And that pressure, if it's not integrated, it explodes as the shadow of unintegrated rage, making death a glorious goal rather than an entropic state to be overcome.
So the core insight here is that the Christos consciousness, the very technology for cellular and material mastery, is kept locked up in these loops of suffering and turmoil because the persecution of the original practitioners creates a lineage of collective trauma that just manifests as catastrophic violence.
It's that repeating historical cycle where the persecuted become the persecutors.
Yeah.
And to break it, we have to stop projecting that ancestral pain externally and integrate the violence and trauma internally, which was the whole point of the alchemical fire to begin with.
That brings us to Section 5, the New Reformation and the call for indefinite life. If we recognize these patterns of failure and the mechanics of suppression, where do we go from here? The first step is recognizing the collective Messiah.
Right. The New Reformation can't be about waiting for a singular savior. The source stresses that the messianic consciousness, the Christos state, is the collective awakening of humanity to its creative, self-sovereign potential. The anointed state has to become the norm, not the exception.
This means the trajectory of human development isn't just moral or technological, it's a technical evolution. It requires increasing mastery of the consciousness-matter interface. Anything less is just settling for spiritual infancy.
And if you look at the source's proposed theses for this new consciousness revolution, they provide a kind of architectural blueprint for this evolution.
Let's highlight some of these key principles for you. Thesis 4, salvation is cellular.
This is the absolute reframing of the religious mission. Salvation is not a legal transaction in a heavenly courtroom. It's not mediated by a priest or a doctrine. It is the restoration of cellular coherence, of health, of functionality, the reversal of entropic decay. It happens in this body, in this life.
And linked directly to that is Thesis 8, longevity is spiritual practice. This challenges the deeply ingrained idea that a short mortal life is somehow virtuous.
Extending health span indefinitely is stewardship. Every premature death, whether it's at 80 or 40, is lost wisdom. It's interrupted development. It's unnecessary suffering. A society that's designed around indefinite longevity would have to structurally oppose the scarcity and fear that characterize our current world. It shifts the focus to long-term regenerative planning.
And the ultimate goal, Thesis 10, the Messiah is collective. The Christos state has to become the norm, requiring a species-wide evolution where the majority achieve this capacity for self-mastery.
And to support that massive evolution, we need a practical architecture for indefinite life. This demands a complete civilizational restructuring, moving away from systems built on scarcity and mortality.
Starting with the economy, economic restructuring. If matter can be influenced and needs can be manifested, even on a micro scale of community coherence like the Jasians showed, then artificial scarcity and wage slavery become fundamentally obsolete.
We have to transition to post-scarcity abundance models, where resources are shared based on need and generated through coherent collective intention, rather than hoarded based on fear.
And medically, the shift is maybe the most profound. We have to move from chronic disease management, which, let's be honest, often profits from perpetual illness, to health optimization and radical cellular regeneration.
Which requires the immediate and mandatory integration of consciousness practices, meditation, focused intention, energy work, sound therapy, as standard medical intervention. The placebo effect needs to become the deliberate, reproducible effect.
And finally, governance. If wisdom is rooted in proven self-mastery, the source suggests moving towards structures based on demonstrated wisdom and alchemical attainment, not on wealth or charisma or birthright.
The convergence is what makes this moment so unique. Technology is the reconciliation mechanism. The ancient teachings were suppressed because they were physical, they were technical. And now science is finally confirming those mechanics.
So we have the ancient consciousness technologies from Sufism and Gnosticism. We have modern scientific frameworks like quantum physics, bioelectricity, and epigenetics to validate them. We have longevity breakthroughs, senolytics, NAD, plus precursors making indefinite health span scientifically plausible.
And crucially, we have decentralization. The source is emphatic about this. Centralized systems always corrupt the teaching for control purposes. They centralize power by externalizing salvation. The kingdom, therefore, has to operate as a distributed network, like the early Jerusalem community, that can't be controlled or captured by a single authority. Decentralization is spiritually mandatory.
And this whole deep dive brings us back to the personal dimension, to that comfort you, the listener, mentioned finding in this historical confrontation. Understanding that the one who was crucified was a shadow, while the conscious one transcended.
This is the psychological payoff of the entire thesis. It's the core of invincibility. When you're confronting unconscious systems, whether it's an abusive personal dynamic, a predatory institution, or just the chaos of the world, you operate with the awareness that your essential consciousness cannot be damaged.
They can wound the projection, the ego, the temporal form, but they cannot touch the essence. And that creates a psychological and spiritual resilience that makes you unbreakable in the ways that really matter.
It's exactly what Yeshua modeled in his trial. Complete composure, non-reaction, because he knew the entire drama, the entire assertion of external authority was being enacted upon a temporal projection.
So what does all this mean for us right now? We're not trying to reform Pauline Christianity. We are actively trying to recover James's practice-based method. The question shifts completely from which religion is true to which techniques work most effectively in creating non-entropic life.
And the answer is to take the best, most scientifically validated techniques from all the sources, Sufism, Hermeticism, Gnosticism, modern quantum biology, apply them rigorously, measure the results, and then share them freely.
This reformation isn't about rearranging the furniture in the prison. The furniture is the doctrine. The prison is the acceptance of entropy. This reformation is about remembering you were never imprisoned to begin with. You just forgot how to walk through walls.
The boiling lake is the alchemical vessel, and the fire is transformative, not punitive. The crucial choice before you is whether you enter that process consciously and choose refinement, or unconsciously, experiencing the meltdown of the mortal self as hell. The kingdom is at hand, meaning it is within your reach right now if you just extend your hand and choose the practice over the promise. You are the technical specification. Now begin the work.